where it's a more natural progression, a more natural two-way relationship most often. So that's the delta. We want to also look at the ratio, the friend-follow ratio, to see kind of to what extreme these things are happening. When you look at that kind of broken out a little bit more, you know, if you look at people that have 100 times more friends, and you look at people that even have just 1 to 10 times more followers, what you see is really that aggressive strategy breaking out again. People that have been very aggressive and having way more friends, trying to collect the new counts, and then once that's successful, getting that follower count up. We looked at that, let's zoom in here, and look at the suspended users, the followers versus friend comparison compared to legitimate accounts. And what's interesting is you rarely see accounts able to get to these very high numbers and then get suspended. You're able to actually kind of collect them most often, you know, right before they're reaching that limit. Some of them are able to collect, you know, 10,000, 100,000 followers and then be detected. But what you see is really lots of small accounts that are being used for malicious activity. So that's the kind of one of the points here. This thing I want to come back to is this tweet number. And we looked at earlier just the number of tweets that an account has sent over time. But here we look at, well, how many actual tweets do you send per day? Anybody here like have an idea how many tweets you send a day? 2, 5. So I looked and I was like, I don't know. I tweet sometimes I don't. And so I looked and, you know, my tweet number happens to be like 1.6. Right, so if you take the time I've had my account and just do the simple division, I send on average 1.6 tweets a day. And, you know, looked at the guy who sits next to me and looked at it was like 2.1. Now, looked at another guy I know and his tweet number was 40. I was like, yeah, he is pretty annoying. Like at 40, it's like, wow, people tweet that much. But then you start to look at it, and what happens is over half the network has a tweet number, you know, less than 1, which isn't surprising because remember, about 20% of networks never tweeted. You know, a lot of average people tweet 1 to 4 times a day. But then you have these accounts that tweet 5 to 10 times a day, 10 to 100 times a day, over 100 times a day. So you think of, you know, tweeting 100 times a day, kind of during a normal work day, you're tweeting like every 10 minutes. And he's like, who's sitting there doing it, besides a couple of you doing it right now, but like who's sitting there doing that? And so what's interesting is there are only 0.19% of people, about 0.2% of people that tweet more than 100 times a day. And you're like, okay, well, that's a very small section of the network. Don't worry about them. Well, if you think about that, it's 0.2% of the network. And let's assume for a second the network's 100 million people, right? You're talking about a couple 100,000 accounts. When you have a couple 100,000 accounts tweeting at least 100 times a day, all of a sudden that 0.2% of the people can account for 38% of the traffic. So, you know, those people are imparting when you look at it from a volume perspective. So we start to kind of look at some of these attributes and say, well, what of these attributes can we use and put together, and what are the relationships for legitimate accounts and illegitimate accounts? So we looked at, okay, how many followers does someone have versus how many tweets they send a day? And, you know, things here aren't that surprising. Basically, people that have 100 to 1,000 followers, they tweet on a, this is actually, they tweet kind of regular basis. People that have a ton of followers, typically celebrities, a little bit busier. Most of them don't tweet as often. Not very surprising, but we start to look at these clusters. If we look at clusters of your friend-follower delta and your tweet number, what can we find? And so I'll point out about 5 different clusters that we came across. This first one is a very extreme follower and friend delta. So you see, you know, these are accounts that have, you know, 100,000 more followers, 80,000 more followers, 60,000. And what you see here is there's pretty legitimate accounts. They're mostly kind of pop stars, news sites, and aggregators. So they have lots of followers, but they actually tweet a lot. You know, they tweet number 115 times a day. But these are just very high volume, legitimate accounts. Now, if you come down to friend-follower deltas that are not as extreme, you know, around the 5,000 range, you start to see more niche things that some would call maybe spammy. You see a lot of jobs and news posts. You see, you know, poke now, work freelance. I'm not going to read that first one, but you know, you start to see things that are a little more niche, some still legitimate, but some would, you know, definitely call spammy or unsolicited types of things. Then if you look at kind of this cluster that we saw where you have a friend-follower ratio in the neighborhood of 2,500, you still have this high tweet number, now you start to see some scammers. You start to see like earn money today. You start to see money wholesale. You start to see, you know, revs by sell. You start to see kind of more scammy and phishing type of accounts. But what's interesting is it doesn't just continue to go in that direction. If you look at this friend-followed ratio around 1,000, a delta around 1,000, you start to see some things that are legitimate still, but just smaller targeted things. So you see some small cities, you see some goofy bots that show up, you see stock tips, Dallas listings and so forth. But then as you continue to go and you see this negative, follower-friend ratio or delta, these are people that are early on in the account creation. They're still trying to collect new followers, and so their delta is negative. You see some things that are really scammers coming out. You see instant biz tips, skincare wonder, cam for porn. So, with this, we're just using the delta, public information, just the friend count, the follower count, how often they're tweeting, and we're able to use that, throw it at classifiers, and get the separation into some clusters. And, so some of the things you're able to see, you kind of look at some of the accounts that, that were coming up. Here's an example, Download Heaven. And, this guy has a negative friend follow delta, like negative 400, tweets 144 times a day. And you actually follow the site to where they're pointing you. You end up a site that looks like this, offering all types of interesting, wares for your PC. But then you go and look at their history on, say, Safe Browse, for instance, and you see that, in the last 90 days, this guy was serving 15 pages, serving malicious software, 5 Trojans of exploit, and malicious software hosted on 2 domains. Right, so kind of example after example of that. Here's another guy, negative 200 friend-follower ratio, tweets about 80 times a day, super web hunt, it's offering all types of flash converters. And you go and you look at the malware history for this particular domain that he's pointing to you to. You have 7 Trojans, 3 scripting exploits, 3 exploits, 28 pages serving malware. So just interesting results of being able to kind of dig in based on just the properties of the account. This is without looking at the URLs and tweets, without looking at the profiles, and begin to get clusters that are correlating with people that have been known to host malicious software on the destinations that they're pointing you to. So another example there. Now, one of the things here is this is when we went out and used this features to go and try to find those clusters. We went out and we said, hey, we're going to go find scammers. We're going to go find the bad accounts. The next question that we wanted to answer was, well, how often does that happen for real people? If I'm a normal user on Twitter, how often do I encounter these malicious users and these malicious links? Does that make sense? So, we went on and said, hey, we want to go find the bad guys. And we found them, and we found a couple, good ways with some basic user reputation to kind of highlight them. Then we want to take a different view, kind of take the view of a normal user coming online and see, well, how often are you coming across this type of malware? How often will you encounter these people? And in this case, I wanted to really compare it to a different type of system. I wanted to kind of compare it to search engines. And say, okay, well, if you look at the accounts, look at the search volumes that these sites are claiming. Is it coming up here? I want to build, but you look at the search volume that these accounts are claiming. Are you from Twitter in the room? Security conference after security conference, nobody raised their hand. So you look at the volumes that they're claiming, they're really arguing that they're one of the more popular search engines in the world. And that means people go, and you saw the use of trending topics and people clicking and searching for trending topics or searching for local things to go and find content. So I want to compare, well, if I went on any of these kind of search engines, like Twitter or Yahoo or Bing or Google, and I was just going about my normal activity searching for something, what's the chances that I come across malware? I know I've personally become so lazy that I don't type a domain anymore, right? If I know I'm going to say CNN.com, I'm too lazy to type CNN.com. I actually just type CNN in my Google search bar and press enter. I let them do the work, and I see a number, you're shaking your head. So, the point is there's so many eyeballs in the search engines now. I want to compare, let's say Twitter versus these different search engines. If I come in and I'm looking for something, what are the chances of encountering malware? So we set up a different experiment to basically simulate the user experience. And what we used were the trending topics as the indicator of what people are looking for. And so the goal was to really understand the kind of the scope and the nature of this problem. So we set up the system, and basically what it does is run around the clock and look at what are the trending topics or popular search terms, depending on the vocabulary of each search engine. Basically, each search engine exposes what are people searching for that's popular. So we went to each search engine, got their list, and then used that list to go and search for those terms, get the results, and analyze the results to see if we found malicious code. So we ran this across these 4 different search engines. So Bing, Google, Twitter, Yahoo. This particular data that I'm going to show here is for a 57-day span, from April to June. We've continued to run it. So some newer data that we're processing to compare. But you look at a 60-day period, we came across over 25,000 popular topics. We came across over 5 million search results on the other end of those. And we came across malicious code. So we're averaging about 130 samples a day of malicious code showing up on the other end of search results. So, one of the first questions is where? Well, Google 69%, Yahoo 18%, Bing 12%, Twitter 1%. So what's the weird thing there? Is that it's one of the few times in life that Microsoft is at the other end of the list, right? And kind of one of the few times in life, actually because of their market share, in some part, they're on the lower end of the list of being the exploited platform. But then also Twitter, like probably several of you expected that Twitter number to be higher. Well, one of the things that happens is all these guys are search engines. So if you search for something, they go and their job is to organize the web, find what's relevant, and then present it to you in a ranking list, in a ranked list. So because of that, the attackers actually have an opportunity to take advantage of the way that search engines work to find their results in the higher end of that list. So attackers are able to do 2 things, or they're able to go use search engine optimization to make their sites come up high, or they're able to go and target sites that already have a high ranking to make sure they've exploited those high ranking sites. Well, with Twitter, for the most part, they don't have that opportunity, right? To a search on Twitter is, pretty much a, okay, here you go. It's okay, what's going down the feed right now? Okay, you want everything that string matches this, that's recent there. It's not ranked, right? It's not organized. There's no true relevance that's there. I mean, Twitter's working on that and trying to change their search to mirror that more of the search engines. But if you're an attacker and you want to reach eyeballs with your attack, you actually have a better chance and you can game the system more if you're putting your attack on a search engine more so than on Twitter. Because on Twitter, you're just kind of another random tweet, and it's just you're playing the odds of when someone clicks search. So that's the reason that you really see this only 1%, because it shows the attackers taking advantage of search engine optimization on the other engines. So we'll take a look at a couple of the things that we came across while doing this work. One of the things is you'll just look at the daily malware activity by source. It varied by day, but every day Google was the key source of the malware that we were coming across. Twitter had days where you couldn't come across any, depending on when you took the snapshot. But overall, they averaged at 1%. One thing that we wanted to ask was, well, is there a particular day of week that's more relevant? The short answer is no. You see pretty much consistent range every day. But if you look at the particular time of day, there was some strong indicators here. If you look at the time block, basically this is situated in the Eastern Standard Time, but if you look at the time block, the 4th of the day, that's 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. We basically found over half of the malicious links doing searches in that time span. So that was an interesting thing. One of the things that we were able to come across here is, well, when do search terms show up in the different search engines? So if I'm an attacker and I'm trying to target users searching for particular things, should I take my attack and time it to go after Twitter first or Bing first or Google first? Kind of how should I think about this? And so we looked at kind of the top things. One thing that we looked at here were the top trending topics that we saw on Twitter during this time period. How long did it take those topics to show up on the other search engines as trending topics? So you see a list of topics there. I won't read them all, but basically this is an indicator of how long it took that topic to show up on the different search engines after it showed up on Twitter. And what you see here is, on average, Google, it took 1.2 days to show up as a trending topic, Bing 4.3, and then Yahoo 4.8. But then we saw certain topics that would show up on the search engines before they would show up on Twitter. So basically what we saw was pop and culture-based items became trending on Twitter first. And then things that were more kind of true news related and current events, showed up on the search engines first. So things that were kind of a little more culture versus kind of true news and world events showed up on the different engines in different ways. Then we want to look at, well, are there particular types of categories that the attackers are targeting when they're going after poisoning these accounts? So one thing that we looked at here were, what are the top categories for these trending topics? You look at the trending topics, what types of sites are they pointing to?